Welcome back, everyone. In a single moment, the fate of two empires changed forever. One woman, one crown, and a child who carries Caesar's blood. From Alexandria to Rome. From throne to dagger. This is not a love story. It's a story of power, cunning, and a battle for history itself. Before the journey begins, subscribe to the channel now, because we won't interrupt the story later to remind you. Subscribe now, and immerse yourself in the greatest political drama the ancient world has ever known. Throne of Turmoil. Cleopatra's rise to power on a quiet night in 51 BC, silence blanketed the royal palace of Alexandria. Pharaoh Ptolemy XII, who had ruled Egypt through storms and uncertainty, closed his eyes for the last time. His death was not merely the end of a life. It was the beginning of a turbulent chapter that would reshape history. Cleopatra, in the bloom of youth, stood beside her child brother, Ptolemy XIII. The crown placed upon their heads was no symbol of unity. It was the seed of a coming divide. Cleopatra was no ordinary heir. She was educated, fluent in multiple languages, politically astute, and keenly aware of the faces around her. From the very first moment, she acted as a true queen, while her brother remained a name on parchment. But in the Ptolemaic court, power is never granted, it is seized. And what began as a dual coronation quickly unraveled into a battle for survival. It didn't take long for the palace to turn against her. Cleopatra's swift rise unsettled the balance of power, and those who thrived in the shadows began to stir. At the heart of the conspiracy stood Pothinus, chief advisor to the young King Ptolemy XIII, who was barely 14. He saw Cleopatra not as a co-ruler, but as a threat to his control over the boy king. With quiet precision, Pothinus poisoned the court against her. He whispered doubts, forged alliances, and slowly stripped Cleopatra of her authority. Her name vanished from official documents. Her presence faded from royal decrees. Cleopatra's reign began with promise, but power in Egypt was never held by crowns alone. It was whispered, maneuvered, and stolen in silence. Behind the boy king Ptolemy XIII stood Pothinus, his chief advisor, a man who ruled not by title, but by influence. He watched Cleopatra closely, her command of languages, her diplomatic reach, her growing popularity, and he saw danger. The conspiracy unfolded in layers. Pothinus first isolated her politically, removing her name from royal decrees. Then he forged alliances with the general Achilles and the royal tutor Theodotus. Together, they built a shadow government, one that would act in the boy king's name, but serve their own ambitions. By mid-48 BC, the coup was complete. Cleopatra was stripped of her authority and forced to flee Alexandria. Her destination, Upper Egypt, likely Thebes, far from the capital's marble halls and Roman envoys. Her exile lasted several months, long enough for Egypt to descend into chaos. The economy was collapsing. Famine loomed. The treasury owed Rome vast sums, and the people were torn between loyalty to the exiled queen and the puppet king controlled by schemers. In Alexandria, Pothinus tightened his grip. He summoned Achilles and the Egyptian army from Pelusium preparing for open confrontation. But Cleopatra was not idle. In the shadows of Thebes, she gathered allies, raised forces, and waited for the moment to reclaim her throne. Egypt stood on the edge, not just of civil war, but of collapse. And in that silence, a queen prepared to rise again. In Upper Egypt, where the Nile flows quietly between ancient temples, Cleopatra was gathering her supporters. Exile was not an end. It was a new beginning, far from the palace. She reorganized her plans, rallied loyal tribes, hired mercenaries who had once fought by her side, and relied on her unwavering intellect. Meanwhile, Alexandria welcomed an extraordinary guest. Julius Caesar, fresh from his victory in the Roman Civil War, arrived in pursuit of his rival Pompey, but instead of a fugitive. He found himself in the heart of a dynastic crisis threatening Rome's grain supply and strategic interests in Egypt. Cleopatra, ever the strategist, saw her moment. She didn't enter the palace as a queen. She arrived as a message, in a scene etched into history. She is said to have wrapped herself inside a Persian rug and had it delivered to Caesar's quarters W. If in the royal palace, when the rug was unrolled, Caesar found not a gift, but a ruler who knew exactly what she wanted. Her beauty, intellect, and confidence converged in a single moment, a moment that would alter the course of history. Caesar, who came as a mediator, became an ally. He backed her claim against Ptolemy the 13th and restored her to the throne as sole monarch. It wasn't a military conquest. It was a triumph of diplomacy, of presence, of a woman who refused to be erased. And so, Cleopatra returned to her throne not by the sword, but by sheer force of will, supported by the most powerful man in the world, with a vision for a stronger, independent, and prosperous Egypt. At that moment, Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt not as a conqueror, but as a mediator. He came to collect Rome's debts, but found himself in the midst of a dynastic civil war. On an unforgettable night, Cleopatra entered Caesar's chambers, wrapped in a rug not bearing a sword, but an idea. She wasn't seeking protection. She was offering partnership. Caesar saw her, and in her eyes, he read what words could not say. A woman who knew how to rule, not how to plead. She said, "I am Egypt. I do not ask for the throne, I reclaim it." He replied, "I'm not looking for a queen. I'm looking for an ally." And so the alliance began. An alliance between two civilizations, between intellect and ambition, between East and West. With Caesar's support, Ptolemy was defeated and drowned in the Nile. Cleopatra was crowned sole ruler of Egypt in a formal pharaonic ceremony. But the relationship went beyond politics. In the palace's long nights, they spoke of philosophy, power, and the future. Cleopatra spoke like someone who understood history, not feared it. In Thebes, a child was born bearing two names: Caesarion, son of Caesar, heir to Egypt. Cleopatra held him and said, "In his veins flows Rome and Egypt. Let him be the bridge between them." But Caesar, though tender, knew Rome recognized law, not blood. In 46 BC, Cleopatra visited Rome at Caesar's invitation. She stayed in a villa near his palace, stirring controversy among the Roman elite. In the Senate, whispers echoed, a foreign queen and an illegitimate child. She's more than a queen. She's a threat. But Caesar did not retreat. He saw her as a partner in an imperial vision that began in Egypt. Then came March of 44 BC. On a cursed day, Caesar was stabbed in the Senate. The man fell, and with him, the dream of a shared empire. Cleopatra returned to Egypt, carrying her son and the weight of a legacy. She stood in a sacred temple and told her advisors, Rome killed the man, but not the vision. Caesarion will rule land, I will rule with him. And so, Cleopatra was not merely a queen. She was an idea, a bridge, the beginning of a new age. Cleopatra returned to Egypt not as a guest, but as a bearer of a heavy political legacy. She carried her son Caesarion and the memory of a man who had sought to unite East and West, only to fall before the dream was fulfilled. Her return was not a celebration, but a silent declaration of a new era. To the Egyptians, she was once again their queen. But in her eyes, she carried a vision far greater than a crown. She entered her palace in Alexandria, surrounded by solemn silence. Soldiers bowed, priests offered blessings, and advisors awaited her word. She stood before them, holding the child, and said, Rome killed the man, but not the vision. Caesarion will rule land, I will rule with him. She began reorganizing the court, consolidating her power, and expanding influence in the south. She sent expeditions, monitored trade, and rebuilt Egypt's image as an independent force. In the temples, her image was carved holding Caesarion, a symbol of dual royal blood. In the palaces, she planned, not reminisced. Cleopatra did not mourn Caesar. She continued what he had begun. She knew Rome would never recognize her son as heir, but Egypt would. And she knew the world was changing, and that she must write her role in it, not be written by others. Thus began a new chapter, one that did not rely on Caesar, but on his legacy. A chapter in which Egypt would be reshaped by a woman and a child who bore two names. And so, another chapter closes in the story of the queen who defied Rome. Thank you for watching, and we invite you to subscribe now. Stay with us and remain at the heart of history. But before we leave this scene, will Cleopatra survive what comes next? That's the question we'll answer in the next episode. Until then, stay safe.